But I do believe we live in a multicultural society, and let me share with you what I mean. If you're white in the room, you probably had pumpkin pie for Thanksgiving dessert. I had sweet potato pie.
Yes.
Now, that doesn't mean that we can't agree on hard work, sacrifice, commitment, paying the price, personal responsibility, all the things that Erica talked about. It's just that my culture taught me things in growing up that I didn't necessarily use the 2 + 2 formula to get to 4. Often I use 2.5 + 1.5. I use 3 + 1. I got to the same answer that everybody else got to, but I tweaked it a little bit. I have never been a group thinker. Shelby Steele in his book, The Content of Our Character, talked about group thinking. To say that if you are black, or if you're white, if you're a woman, if you're Hispanic, if you're Native American, you have to think a certain way and act a certain way. And group identity, as Shelby said, in and of itself is not a bad thing. But when group identity says, don't ask where you're marching, just march. Yeah, you got to wear the uniform in spite of the fact that it doesn't fit. Then I'm that little 4th grader back there saying, tell me why we should march if I don't know where we're marching. Tell me why I should wear the uniform if the uniform doesn't fit. Let me give you another cultural moray in the black community. I travel quite a lot. I've been gone for the last 2 weeks. I've been on the road the last 2 weeks. Don scheduled this perfectly. This was the only day on my calendar in the next month, the last 2 weeks, the next 2 weeks, that I'm going to be in D.C. I have the fortune or misfortune or privilege or opportunity or whatever you want to call it to visit a lot of airports. And I don't say this. I'm just saying, if you look like me, you're going to understand this. I pass people in the airport that I've never seen them before in my life. And if I see a black man, it's just customary in our culture that we do this. If it's you don't have to know him. That's just when you make eye contact, kind of give that head nod. If it's an older gentleman, you kind of bow, like that. That's just cultural to where I grew up and the way I grew up. I have been on the Republican Party for 20 years to do outreach and to mean it. And now I've changed over the last 4 or 5 years because I just found out in my thick head, got it through my thick head over the last 4 or 5 years. I don't want outreach. I want inclusion. Because and every time I give this speech, I've heard things from, over the last 4 years, JC's abandoned the party, or JC's this, or he's upset, or he's looking for a contract. Take me out of the equation. I'm 2 months away from being 56 years of age. I've got 5 grandkids. I've got plenty to do. I don't need to be a Republican for a profession. I don't need to be a Republican to make a living. I know how to do that. God's gonna take care of me. But let me tell you what inclusion is. Inclusion says, I'm going to ask Erica to come over and help me bake the cake. I'm not going to bake it and ask her to come over and help me eat it. Baking the cake and asking somebody to come over and help you eat it, that's outreach. Inclusion says, I want the people in this room to help me make it. I'm from the Bill Parcells School of Coaching, and Bill Parcells says this: if I'm the head coach and you want me to cook the meal, you got to allow me to buy some of the groceries. Now you tell me, how is it that every time we put together, the party puts together these black Republican councils or black advisory councils or these councils in presidential elections. I'm not signing any more black advisory council petitions, or I don't want to be on any more black advisory councils because you never get advised. And in 2000, in 2004, I called one of President Bush's, because when it happens, who did the press call? People in this room? J.C. Watts? When something happens that they think is black, the black stuff, who do they call? The people in this room. And ironically, 98% of the time, the people in this room, you don't know about it happening until it happens. You read it about it in the press just like everybody else. Am I asking too much? And again, forget about J.C. Watts. I've got plenty to do. Make memories with my grandkids. I'm a football dad. I go to football games on Saturday and watch my kids play football. I don't need the attention. I don't need the contracts. But why is it that every time these issues are raised, it's about black Republicans wanting a contract? But let's just say that is the case. Nobody says that when other consultants get contracts.
Exactly.
Nobody says that when other auxiliary groups out there get funding. Let me ask you this. How many of you know personally how many of you have known any of the Republican National Committee chairs over the last 3 cycles? Probably 20% of the group had Mike Duncan, Michael Steele, and Chairman Priebus. I knew Michael Steele. That says a lot to me about how serious we are about outreach and inclusion. Now I say that at the risk of sounding like I'm tooting the horn of J.C. Watts, that I'm so much that I think if the Republican National Committee chairman doesn't know me, that something, that by golly, he's a communist. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying this. If you call it outreach, or if you call it inclusion. And I learned this from my church work. I was a youth pastor for 8 years. I still get to preach 12 to 14 times per year around the country somewhere. And I can tell you this, and I'm putting my theological cap on here. If there is now this is my analogy. Nobody else has to take ownership of this. This is my analogy. But if I've got a chance to offend, as a believer, another believer or non-believer, who do you offend? You offend the non-believer. Let me tell you why. Because if you offend the believer, the person that thinks like you, then the non-believer says, man, if that's the way a believer treats another believer, I don't want to be a believer. So if Republicans, black Republicans, and I don't even say black Republicans, I say Republicans that happen to be black. Anybody in this room that's a Republican, you made a conscious choice, decision to be a Republican. Nobody twisted your arm, and when I see black Republicans, I'm doing that. And I'm doing that because I'm saying, I know what you've been through. I know what you've had to put up with. I know the challenges you've had. Going out saying, give me the facts. Give me the truth. I know what you've had to put up with in defending parental choice in education. I know what you've had to put up with in saying that I believe that taxes should be lowered. We don't need more taxes. We need more taxpayers. I know what you've had to go through. I definitely could have done, I could have stayed at the office tonight, or I knew that I was only going to be in town tonight and to come to this event. But I know what Don Scoggins goes through to keep the dots connected and keep the wires, you know, intact and to keep everything up and running. There was a time when I was in Congress, I did not go to one city, and I traveled more than any member of Congress, and probably traveled today more than most sitting members of Congress, and surely more than most former members of Congress. But I would not go to a city or state without making the Republican Party put together for me. And 98% of the occasion, I'd say, I will come under one condition. I want an audience with black Republicans. I want to talk to them. I want to see what's going on. And whatever, I had a summit, I had a conference about a month ago, and asked about 12 different Republicans from around the country, from California to Georgia to, you know, here in central northern Virginia and several other states to come and visit with me, because I wanted to hear their thoughts about the party. And if I named the 12 participants, you would know 10 or 11 of them. And I said to them, I said, the concerns we have about the party, not becoming a party that looks like me. I'm not looking for a party that looks like me. I want a party that looks like heaven. You're going to have red, yellow, brown, black, and white in heaven. And I asked them this. I said, all the things that we moan and groan about and Monday morning quarterback about, I ask you to put your hat on as a parent. As a parent, I learned in parenting kids, you won't change what you tolerate. So we can talk about the party, Hispanics, black, women, you know, white conservatives, whomever. We can complain all we want. And I said to them, I said, we can't put all the blame on the party. Now, I mentioned the Republican National Committee because I think that's where your inclusion, your outreach, your efforts ought to be centered. I don't know the chairman of the Republican National Committee. I've never met him. To me personally, not to you, but that tells me a lot about your efforts to be inclusive. But I said this, I said, again, it's not all the party's fault. A lot of it is our fault because we put up with it. And I say that respectfully. And I don't say that with anger or bitterness or animosity. I don't say it for that reason. I am a team. I have been cultured, and every ounce of my body has been cultured in the team concept. I wasn't a boxer. I wasn't a tennis player. I wasn't a golf player. I was a football player. I had to, in order for me to do my job, I had to rely on 10 other guys, or 11 other guys in Canada. We play with 12 men instead of 11. But I had to depend on you to do your job. Tiffany?
Yes.
I had to depend on Tiffany doing her job. I had to depend on her doing her job. I had to depend on him doing his job. If they didn't do it, you know, a quarterback is only as good as the surrounding, his supporting cast. All of my culture, my learning, my thinking, it's been in the team. Yeah, you're going to have a difficult time, but you need to go support Don. By golly, if he's doing it, you need to be there. If something's going on in California, if you can make it work on your calendar, you need to be there.